And there used to be hitching racks down here along the west side where they would tie up their horses when they came to a funeral. It was prairie grass, and they laid it out, but in the fall of '67 they planted wheat here, and you can see a dead furrow over here that was still left from that wasn't filled in very well. Then a few years ago we decided to save this piece of ground here for the native prairie grasses and other plants. It's really not virgin prairie because it was broken up once. The old part of the cemetery here is what is unique about it. The people were not buried in family lots, but were buried in choirs or groups of people. These first, through the until that space there, those are all married women. Then they're married men, and there's another group of married women. And down there where you see the two zinc markers, there is a man and wife buried together because they wanted to be buried beside each other. So the church fathers gave the permission to be buried together. Then the second row and third row are children, and then the next row were young adults. There were young women on this side, and young men on the other side. The Moravians believed in not making a show of markers, so they used marble slabs that laid flat on the ground. In the front there are Amos and Joshua Mixes. Amos would be your great-great-great-grandfather, Lindy, and Joshua Mix was my great-grandfather. And they were brothers, and they helped found the church. Over west there, you can't see it now because of the trees, but there's a house where, and that's where the Joshua Mix family lived and where the church was organized in that home. Joshua and Amos's markers were flat until a few years ago when we were having markers straightened up. And the man that was working, after I found out how much he was going to charge, he said, I'll just straighten up a few of these little ones free. And I didn't think about those two flat ones. But when we came back, he had raised those and put them in cement, not knowing that they were supposed to be flat. However, back in the family lots, we'll see the graves of Bishop Bachman and his wife and several children of pastors. The first settlers here in Gracehill were men who were returning from the Civil War, and there were 9 of these, and we used to, on the Sunday before Memorial Day, have a service here. The Women's Relief Corps from Westchester would come down with bouquets and wreaths, and we'd have a little ceremony, and the band from the Mid-Prairie School would come down. The oldest veteran buried here is Joseph Blickensderfer, and he fought in the War of 1812. And then were Robert Beatty, Daniel Cortman, Tobias Remmel, John Meyer, Jacob Blick, Isaac Scheidler, C.C. Strom, and B.F. Battle. Those were the original Civil War veterans that settled in this area. By that tall marker there, you see a piece on the ground, and we think that was on top there, and we think vandals must have pushed it off. The people have wondered about the trees that were set in sets of 4. Well, that was the middle drive here was wider, and then there was a middle drive across the middle. And then there were alleys, and where those alleys intersected the streets is where they planted the trees. Of course, since 1998, when we had the bad windstorm, some of those trees have been destroyed, and it's not as pretty as it used to be. We hope that these new ones will take over. There used to be a hedge, an Osage orange hedge planted around the south side and the east side of the cemetery. And the brush grew up in that, and it was quite a nuisance. So that was cleared out. And then this new fence put up in 1953. There is a little more land that goes down almost to the pond there that belongs to the cemetery, but we just let the renter next there pasture that, so we don't have so much to mow. Back here where Bishop Bachman is buried was one of the first family lots that was laid out, and he was the pastor here, and he, I think, died in 1896, and he was very well loved by the congregation, and the authorities in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, thought the service would be in Bethlehem, but Mrs. Bachman said no, he wanted to be buried here. So the people wanted to show some reverence for him, and they decided to carry the casket from the church. They started out with some of the older men, and then the younger men finished up carrying it. But he was a very heavy man, and it almost proved too much for them. There were originally four varieties of trees planted here. White pine, there's still like these two tall ones there. Scotch pine, these spruce, and the arborvitae. The Moravians in the traditional centers have sunrise service on Easter morning, and that's by sunrise, so that's by the time the sun gets up and not at 7 o'clock. And when the Reverend Bender was here, he wanted to have a sunrise service, so he came down a week or two before that, so he'd know what time the sun rose from at the cemetery here. And we had the first part of the service in the church, and then we walked down and finished out there, and just as the sun was rising, Mrs. Sherlock would lead the singing of the hymns. And it was an inspirational time. Yeah, Dave and Lawrence, and Charlie Ruppel, and Charlie Hayes was in the Guard, and Randy Rickard. Tobias Remmel was a musician in the Civil War, and his son died rather young and was buried here where the younger men were buried, but the father wanted to be buried by him. The father's two wives are buried in the front rows here. Here is the marker of a child of a minister here in Gracehill. It goes back to 1885. It's supposed to be flat. Of course, well, you see, Amos Nix was the agent and bought this land for the church, And then when it was sold, I mean, when Gracehill was laid out and they sold the lots, then the church the money went back east to support widows' houses and missions and things like that. But you say Aletha has the deed that has Amos on?
Yeah, we'll have to get that out. Handwriting's a lot better back then than it is now.
Yes.
But, amazing clarity.
You can read it.
Yeah.
And I'll say the Buxbaums all moved away, except my mother.
Okay.
And the Beidles all moved away. Well, I wouldn't say they all moved away. Ella married Ralph Brinning, and Mellie married Charlie Harvey. And the others moved away. Some lived down by Muscatine and, California and so on. Well, there wasn't enough to do for the young people when they grew up here. There were as many as 75 people in the village at the most. So there wasn't enough work for them, so they moved. Mr. Strom was a tailor. And he made suits and for men and boys. Then he, I guess, ready to wear came in, and he had the post office for a little while, and he had a store down in the house where Charlie Ruppel used to be, down there east of the community building.
Then Vidiska's house was the store.
Well, that was my grandfather Buxbaum's store was on the north side.
Okay.
That was the living room. But of course that's been changed so much now.
It's quite a bit different now.
Yeah. Now you can see the house over where the church was organized, the Joshua Mix home. Of course it's been remodeled a number of times. Well, yeah, I don't know. I suppose the people when they bought bought their big markers, bought these corner markers.
Okay.
But now those cost $50 a piece or more. When I started mowing here, they were sticking up, so I put them down lower, or so you could mow over them. Except those Cortman ones, they were so heavy I couldn't lift them out.